DNA bombshell. Jack exposes the truth. Victor is Matt's real father. In the ever-churning storm of secrets and backstabbings that define the young and the restless, Genoa City was rocked to its very foundation when a DNA stunner exploded with seismic force. Jack Abbott standing in the center of the chaos, fortified not with pitfalls or manipulation, but with cold, irrefragable wisdom. For weeks, pressure had been erecting around youthful Matt's maternity, whispers echoing through the halls of Jabbo and Newman Enterprises likewise. The question of who Matt's real father was had turned into further than a particular riddle. It came a commercial armament, a family war, and an emotional battleground that hovered to tear piecemeal patrimonies erected over decades. And when Jack eventually revealed the verity, that Victor Newman was Matt's natural father, no bone walked down unscathed. It began with Jack noticing inconsistencies. Matt's medical dread had needed blood work, and subtle disagreement in family history raised red flags. Jack, always logical and still grim, requested a deeper look into the results. What he set up didn't just surprise him, it frightened him. The inheritable labels didn't align with the presumed paternal line. There was no denying the substantiation. Jack didn't jump to conclusions. He commissioned an independent lab test. Icing the chain of guardianship was airtight, however. He demanded evidence that could repel indeed Victor's redoubtable counterassaults, if he was going to defy Victor Newman. Meanwhile, Victor, confident, commanding, untouchable as ever, was busy orchestrating his rearmost power play against the Abbotts. He'd no idea that a different kind of preemption was coming, one that would strike at the heart rather than the boardroom. When Jack summoned him to the Abbott manse under the guise of agitating an armistice, Victor arrived trim and suspicious in equal measure. The air between them was thick with decades of contest, of blows traded and grievances nursed. But this time, Jack wasn't interested in trading cuts. With steady resoluteness, Jack laid the envelope on the coffee table. He told Victor that this wasn't about business. It wasn't about Jabbo or Newman Enterprises. It was about Matt. Victor's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of concern betraying his else ironclad countenance. Jack revealed that the original maternity supposition was blooded. The DNA test results, vindicated doubly, refocused to a different father, one with an inheritable profile matching Victor Newman with absolute certainty. Victor's first response was unbelief, also fury. He indicted Jack of fabrication, of despair, of carrying an elaborate scheme to destabilize him. But Jack anticipated that response. He handed Victor the attestation, the lab credentials, the timestamps. Every detail was scrupulous. Victor read in silence, the weight of the verity pressing down on him. For maybe the first time in times, the great Victor Newman was speechless. News of the disclosure spread like campfire. Nikki, devastated and blindsided, plotted to reuse how such a monumental secret could have remained retired. Her marriage had survived infidelity, lies, and commercial sabotage, but a retired child? That was commodity additional entirely. She brazened Victor with pulsing wrathfulness, demanding to know if he'd known. Victor swore he hadn't, that this was as much a shock to him as it was to everyone differently. But Nikki's trust had been fractured ahead, and this new crack ran dangerously deep. Victoria saw the situation through a colder lens. A new Newman heir at law meant an implicit shift in the power structure. Where would Matt stand? Would Victor favor him? Would this newfound son come another pawn in Victor's conglomerate? The counter-accusations were enormous. Victoria began calculating, strategizing indeed as her feelings churned. She had fought her entire life for her place in her father's world. She'd not surrender it fluently. Meanwhile, Matt himself was left reeling. The man he believed was his father suddenly wasn't. His identity, his sense of belonging, everything was thrown into chaos. He brazened Victor in a raw, emotional showdown that stripped down the mogul's armor. Matt demanded honesty, no commercial spin, no manipulation. Just verity. Victor, for formally, tried vulnerability. He admitted he'd no knowledge of Matt's actuality but expressed a desire to make a relationship. Whether that desire stemmed from genuine paternal instinct or a calculated move to cover his heritage remained an open question. Jack's provocations were scanned by all. Some indicted him of exploiting the situation to wound Victor. But intimately, Jack scuffled with complex passions. He claimed he revealed the verity for Matt's sake, that the youthful man merited to know his natural roots. Still, there was inarguable satisfaction in seeing Victor destabilized. Their contest had defined much of Jack's adult life. Exposing this secret felt like a rare, decisive palm. As Genoa City absorbed the shockwave, alliances shifted. Commercial stocks wavered amid enterprise about heritage and race. Rumors swirled in the corridors of power. The Newman family, long perceived as imperturbable, appeared vulnerable. And vulnerability in that world was dangerous. Victor ultimately stepped into the limelight, addressing the situation with a controlled public statement. He conceded the DNA results and verified his intent to support Matt. It was a masterclass in damage control, but those who knew Victor Stylish honored the subtle earthquake beneath the face. This wasn't just another reproach, it was particular. Nikki faced a painful crossroads. Could she accept this new reality? Could she embrace a child born outside their marriage? Her love for Victor had survived innumerous storms, but prostration counted heavily. She sought solace in familiar comforts, passing in those she trusted most, questioning whether fidelity demanded abidance without limit. The Abbott family, too, set up themselves entangled. Ashley bothered about the long-term fallout. Billy, ever impulsive, saw occasion in chaos. The contest between the Abbotts and Newmans hovered to escalate yet again, this time fueled by blood ties and broken trust. At the center of it all stood Matt, no longer a supplemental figure but a vital player. His very actuality now carried emblematic weight. He represented verity arising from deception, biology grueling supposition, the once colliding with the present. Whether he'd embrace the Newman heritage or reject it outright remained uncertain. In classic fashion, the plot underlined why the young and the restless continues to allure cult decade after decade. It wasn't simply about a DNA test. It was about identity, power, family, and the fragile line between love and control. Jack's disclosure didn't just expose Victor as Matt's real father, it exposed the vulnerabilities of every character involved. As the dust settled, one thing was clear: nothing in Genoa City would ever be the same. The DNA stunner had exploded, reshaping connections and reconsidering commitment. And if history had proven anything, it was that when verity and ambition collide in this world, the fate is no way quiet. The fallout from the DNA disclosure didn't quiet down in the days that followed. It boosted, strengthened, and sculpted fault lines through every relationship connected to both the Abbott and Newman dynasties. In Genoa City, secrets infrequently stay buried, but this bone had exploded with similar perfection that no bone could prognosticate where the debris would land coming. What began as a medical anomaly had now evolved into a full-scale emotional and commercial reckoning, the kind that defines the heritage of the young and the restless. Jack Abbott didn't underrate the magnitude of what he'd set into stir. Though he intimately maintained that his sole intention was to ensure Matt knew the verity, intimately he understood that timing signified. Victor Newman had been circling Jabot like a bloodsucker, applying pressure through request manipulation and quiet accessions. By exposing Victor's retired maternity at precisely this moment, Jack had shifted the battleground. Rather of fastening on commercial domination, Victor was forced to defy a particular extremity that hovered to fracture his conglomerate from within. Inside the Newman estate, the atmosphere turned icy. Nikki's grief was concentrated with demotion. For decades she had stood by Victor through reproach after reproach, induced that their bond, still defective, was unbreakable. But discovering that Victor had intentionally sired another child restarted old injuries of treason. Indeed, if he hadn't known about Matt's actuality, the bare possibility that another woman had carried his child was swab in a scar that had no way completely healed. Nikki demanded translucency. Commodity Victor was notoriously uncomfortable immolation. Victor, for his part, was scuffling with a rare loss of control. He flattered himself on knowing every detail, every implicit vulnerability. The idea that a son was without his mindfulness felt like a strategic failure. He began still probing the timeline, retracing connections, examining every once hassle that might explain how Matt came to be. It wasn't about denial. The DNA results were irrefutable. It was about understanding how such a monumental verity escaped his surveillance. Victoria's response was realistic but edged with fear. She had spent her life fighting for confirmation in her father's shadow. The emergence of a new natural son, especially one youthful enough to shape and fester, posed a trouble she couldn't ignore. Though she masked her anxiety behind commercial poise, she began strengthening her alliances within Newman Enterprises. She reviewed race plans, consulted legal counsel, and corroborated her leadership position with strategic moves designed to demonstrate indispensability. Nick, too, plodded. Unlike Victoria, his response was less strategic and more emotional. He flashed back what it felt like to live under Victor's insolvable expectations. However, what kind of pressure awaited him? Nick reached out to Matt Still, offering empathy rather than dominance, if Matt was truly Victor's son. In doing so, he created a subtle peak within the Newman ranks, one stock extending compassion while another set for implicit contest. Matt himself stood at the center of a storm he no way asked to join. His identity felt fractured. The man he'd called father was now biologically unconnected. The man revealed as his natural father was a Goliath whose name carried weight and fear across the business world. Matt's wrathfulness coddled beneath a calm surface. He demanded answers from his mama about why the verity had been hidden. Her explanation, fear of Victor's power, query about the circumstances, desire to cover her child, only incompletely satisfied him. Protection erected on deception was still deception. Jack tried to maintain a probative presence for Matt, but their dynamic grew complicated. Though Jack had delivered the verity, Matt questioned whether Jack's contest with Victor told his decision to reveal it so intimately. Was this about justice, or revenge? Jack claimed it was about integrity, about giving Matt agency over his own identity. Yet indeed he couldn't entirely disentangle his motives from decades of hostility toward Victor. Commercial tumblers gurgled outward. Investors suspected whether Victor would allocate shares to his recently conceded son. Would Matt be granted a seat at the Newman Enterprises board? Attorneys began drafting contingency documents, examining heritage laws and trust structures. Every tale in the fiscal quarter carried counter-accusations. The Newman conglomerate had always appeared monolithic. Now, cracks were visible. Ashley Abbott observed the chaos with cautious intelligence. She understood better than utmost that family dishiness could weaken commercial defenses. While Jack concentrated on the moral counter-accusations of his disclosure, Ashley concentrated on strategy. However, Jabot had a window of occasion to solidify its request position if Victor was detracted by particular bull of SMR. Still, she advised Jack against undervaluing Victor. A wounded Victor Newman was frequently more dangerous than a triumphant bone. Billy Abbott, impulsive and changeable, saw captions rather than heartbreak. He pushed for bold marketing juggernauts and aggressive expansion, believing Victor's distraction could be exploited completely. Jack, still, prompted restraint. The disclosure had formerly been explosive. Raising commercial warfare might push Victor into retribution that would gulf everyone, including Matt. Meanwhile, Nikki faced a deeply particular reckoning. Alone in the quiet of her bedroom, she replayed decades of marriage, passion, treason, conciliation, loss. She asked herself whether love was enough to justify another round of remission. The idea of drinking Matt into the family felt emotionally complex. On one hand, he was innocent, a youthful man thrust into fermentation. On the other, his actuality represented another fracture in her precisely reconstructed trust. Victor ultimately requested a private meeting with Matt, down from cameras and commercial services. The setting was neutral, understated. For formally, Victor left the assessing persona behind. He spoke candidly about his own complicated parenting, about discovering his natural roots latterly in life, about the loneliness that accompanies power. Whether Matt believed his sincerity remained uncertain, but the discussion marked the first step toward commodity suggesting connection. Still, connection didn't abolish pressure. Victoria watched the budding relationship with guarded dubitation. Nick encouraged it cautiously. Nikki withheld judgment, choosing rather to observe whether Victor's conduct matched his words. Genoa City buzzed with gossip, social circles anatomizing every gesture, every appearance, every snap. Jack set up himself suddenly reflective. The satisfaction he originally felt at destabilizing Victor gave way to contemplation. Had he inadvertently hurt Matt by forcing such a public reveal? Could the verity have been delivered more intimately, lower strongly? Yet delaying would have meant allowing a taradiddle to persist. In a city erected on secrets, maybe translucency was bound to be disruptive. As weeks passed, Matt began asserting independence. He refused immediate involvement in Newman enterprises, rejecting hypotheticals that he'd automatically embrace commercial life. Rather, he concentrated on understanding himself, his values, his intentions separate from the Newman name. That decision unsettled Victor further than open rebellion would have. Victor was oriented to fixing heirs at law. Matt's turn down to be prepped challenged his sense of authority. Nikki, witnessing Matt's resistance, set up unanticipated empathy. She honored in him the same desire for autonomy she had fought for throughout her marriage. Sluggishly, cautiously, she extended an olive branch. Their discussion was gentle, unguarded. She made it clear that her conflict wasn't with him but with circumstance. Matt appreciated the honesty. For the first time since the disclosure, he felt seen not as a symbol, but as a person. Commercial dynamics continued evolving. Victoria strengthened her leadership presence intimately. Icing stakeholders saw stability. Nick sculpted out his own path, balancing fidelity with individuality. Jack diverted focus toward invention at Jabot, determined not to let particular vendettas mandate strategy. And Victor, ever flexible, began integrating the verity into his identity. He didn't apologize for the history he didn't know, but he conceded its impact. He established a trust fund for Matt without conditions, a gesture of support rather than control. It was a subtle but significant shift, signaling growth that many believed possible. The DNA stunner hadn't destroyed Genoa City, but it had converted it. Connections recalibrated. Power structures acclimated. Individualities were readdressed. What remained constant was the grim interplay between love and ambition, verity and pride, vulnerability and strength. In the grand shade of the young and the restless, this chapter stood as a memorial that indeed elephants are mortal, indeed rivals can uncover verity, and indeed the most precisely guarded conglomerates can be shaken by commodity as simple, and as important, as DNA. And as always in Genoa City, the story was far from over. The reverberations of the DNA disclosure didn't fade with time. They evolved, reshaped, and bedded themselves into the veritably armature of Genoa City's most important families. What had begun as a clinical evidence of biology had converted into a reckoning that tested fidelity, ambition, remission, and identity at every position. In the world of the young and the restless, blood has always carried emblematic power, but this time it carried legal, emotional, and generational consequences that no bone could completely contain. Victor Newman, a man who had erected his conglomerate on foresight and domination, now set up himself navigating strange terrain motherhood without medication. Though the DNA test left no room for mistrustfulness, accepting the verity needed further than admitting figures on a runner. It needed defying the reality that a piece of his heritage had grown up outside his influence. For a man who valued control above all, that consummation cut deeply. Intimately, Victor reviewed his life with a scrutiny he infrequently allowed himself. He redefined once connections, assaying timelines, questioning moments he'd long dismissed as insignificant. It wasn't lament that consumed him but an acute mindfulness of missed occasion. Had he known about Matt, he'd have shaped him, defended him, prepared him for the ruthless realities of business and power. Rather, Matt had formed his own worldview, one not molded by Newman prospects. Nikki observed these subtle changes with conservative curiosity. She had witnessed Victor's elaboration before, but this was different. There was lower bluster, smaller duns. When he spoke of Matt, his tone carried commodity close to modesty. Yet Nikki's injuries weren't superficial. Indeed, if Victor had been ignorant of Matt's actuality, the circumstances of his generality represented another chapter of secrets in their long and complicated marriage. Trust, formerly fractured, didn't repair itself overnight. Their exchanges came layered and honest in ways they had avoided for times. Nikki demanded emotional responsibility rather than strategic defense. She asked Victor whether he truly wanted a relationship with Matt, or whether he stressed losing applicability in his own family. Victor bristled at the recrimination but didn't dismiss it outright. He admitted that heritage signified to him, maybe further than it should. Nikki combated that heritage without integrity was concave. Victoria, meanwhile, boosted her alert. In board meetings at Newman Enterprises, she projected stability,